Kyle Jenkins is a previous League of Legends analyst for Esports, based in Israel. At one point, Kyle was in the top 10% of League of Legends players globally. Outside of League of Legends, Kyle also has experience in other game titles such as Super Smash Bros. Melee, StarCraft, Hearthstone, Dota 2, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, Overwatch, and Fortnite. Currently, Kyle is the head esports coach and manager video coordinator at Colorado Western University. Kyle has a very impressive career so far, and we're so grateful to have him on the show today. I hope you enjoy.
Kyle, such an impressive career so far. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. I just want to start off, you've been an incredible source of knowledge for us at Valley Esports in such a small amount of time for our lifespan as a business. Where does that characteristic come from you? I can't say it enough. You've been so helpful. Is that just something that you've always wanted to help the esport community, especially some of the new members coming in?
Well, it's certainly been an interest of mine for some time, but the world of collegiate esports is not as big as I think some people believe it to be. Esport directors, at the drop of a hat, really, you help each other. You share procedures. When COVID hit, we all came up with return to play procedures, and those were passed around. What equipment could be used to sterilize our arenas quickly, reviews of such equipment, etc. So it's natural, I think, for esport directors and head coaches to help each other, and I've just extended that to you.
Yeah, well, we really appreciate it. How's your season gone so far with COVID?
Oh, it's been an interesting year. Students on campus, students off campus. Your average esport athlete in the collegiate scene has a lot to deal with these days. It's been a rough year, I think, for everyone, what with everything going on. So it's certainly been a pretty crazy time. But as a community, we've managed to stay together and stay positive, to pun a little bit. And we've had a fun year, certainly. We've grown a lot. Our leaders continue to make great strides. And that's all I can ask for.
Any highlights?
I would say our Rainbow Six team this year, especially, they went from having a very difficult year in the beginning to doing phenomenal at the end. I believe we even managed to do well against, I think, one of the top 10 people in that league this year, which I think is great considering that's a year one team. This was their first year to play together. I'm just really proud of their performance, I think.
Yeah, amazing. I want to jump into it just for anyone who might be listening, who might be new to the world of esports. What is a collegiate manager for esports? What do you do as a job?
Sure. So there are a couple different titles that float around for what I do at different colleges. You could see an esport coordinator. You would see an esports manager, esports head coach, sometimes a little different. And then esports director is probably the most prevalent one. We all do pretty much the same thing. We make sure our teams are enrolled in varsity leagues for the individual titles we compete in. We make sure that our students meet the criteria to compete under that league and under our program's own restrictions. So for instance, GPA plays a part. There are other factors I'd like to touch on later. And that's really my role, is making sure that everyone is coordinated, growing, working together, and then competing at the national level to the best of our ability.
Yeah, awesome. I think further down the track, I want to have a chat to you a little bit about how you kind of look at your potential players. But at the start, I really want to find out a bit more about Colorado Western and what your schedule kind of looks like in your role. You know, what does a Monday to Friday look like for a head esports coach?
I'm happy to go into that. The way it works out is that, so this is our space, the shared space. We call it an esports arena. It's basically just another term for fancy computer lab. Schools these days, they're a great space for our community to come together. We have a fridge full of drinks. We have 2 lounges with TVs. We'll do watch parties for our competitions, watch parties for national competitions. And what we want it to be is really just a hub for our community. Community is a word I use a lot. It's, I'd say, my primary concern here at Western is making sure that we have a community that supports our students academically as well as competitively and, socially as well. So that's something we really focus on. So each day, one of the teams reserves the spot because we have about 60 people on our roster now. So from 4:30 to 8:30 at night, they'll come in and they'll practice. We do open hours before that so that students can practice as their schedule allows. And then we do competitions, usually on Friday or Saturday. Rainbow actually competes Wednesday evening, but that's based on the league that the team competes in. And they don't all compete through the same league.
Okay.
Rough practice and competition schedule.
Yeah, awesome. And what does those practices usually look like? Is it, I know coaching from a sport perspective, every coach has a different, style and approach. What's your style and approach?
We do a lot of internal scrims. I try to get us as many external scrims as possible. I'd say scrims make up the majority of our practices. We do some internal practices where we focus on skill work. This is particularly prevalent in things like Rocket League, where you have obstacle courses that students can drive around in game. You have sites that help you with your ability to cast skill shots, which is your League of Legends competitions. Also in Overwatch, there are obstacle courses where athletes go from one obstacle to another obstacle and learn how to work each champion, I'm going to call them.
Okay, awesome. And what outside of the scrims, there's been this big movement from our research of esports starting to include extracurricular training. Some schools have looked at it for physical training, mental training. What does your kind of extra, secondary training system look like?
So at the moment, I have something called a physical activity mandate, and that looks different from student to student here, but what it means is that I want my students to do some kind of extracurricular activity that involves physical activity. So we have, for instance, an intramural kickball team, intramural sand volleyball team. So esports becomes a more holistic experience when we wrap it into stuff like that. Now, I don't directly incorporate that activity into esports. I've heard some stories about people doing jumping jacks in between games. I don't look at it that way, but I encourage my students to get involved with the greater collegiate community, socially, and intramurals are fun. So that's how I handle that component of our program.
Yeah, interesting. Very cool.
I have one question. Sorry, Sam. Around you mentioned a lot of game actually. Like you say, you have 60 player on your roster, about 60. I'm wondering how difficult it because are you coaching all those teams for their games, or do you have individual coaches for each games?
So as time passes, I have plans to pick up graduate assistants to facilitate our competitive ability, and they'll do things like VOD reviews. They'll do things like track individual stats. Right now, what I'm doing is I grow a student leader and I call them a team captain, and they head individual team practices. Then I review the data and I select our starters for each competition, usually with their input. And this gives us a number of different benefits. So I have a student who I work with individually, which is always a good thing. If I could, I'd do it for all 60 of my students, but I have other things I have to do during the week, so I can't always do that. So I work with one student individually, which is good, and then they take what I tell them and they spread it out amongst their team. And so long as the team is still a community, still cohesive, and still improving via stats that are collected at each competition, then I'm great. I think we're doing awesome, and continue to support everyone for that.
Yeah, I've
That's an
always,
interesting system. And on top of that, I think it teaches the student as well to take responsibility and handle. I think that's a really good system that you have there.
yeah, I think
I like it.
I've always been fascinated by that system that they've implemented quite early. I mean, it's a very structured and powerful system across many different formats. If it be physical sport or more regular sport, or even just the workplace, which is interesting that you have a mentor who takes you through a process and then creates that leadership role. It's really interesting. It's makes so much sense, but I haven't seen a huge amount of it across the esports at the moment, which is, you could be a little innovator there, which is really cool.
Could be.
What are some of the perks? What's the best part of your job?
Well, we have a partnership with Game Fuel, so I have an unlimited amount of that I can drink every week. We get lots of swag from different companies. I Buy Power is a partner, so I, sneak off in the night with an extra big mouse pad from time to time. But in all seriousness, I really enjoy what I do here. I feel like I make a difference. Those are some of at least for me, some things I really enjoy. I mean, I get to come to work every day and we play games. How many people get to say that? So.
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool. What's the hardest part?
Hardest part. So my program is on top of a mountain, which makes things like computer repair difficult. Towers recently, we needed to get it, a little tweaked. It's seen a lot of use recently. So that's taken me like 30 days to get it back so far, but you have to ship it off the mountain and then it has to come back to the tippy top. So from a program level, there are some headaches, but nothing that takes away from how great and how lucky I am to be here.
Yeah, interesting. We've talked about what you do right now, and it's a really interesting job. I think people who love esports and also love supporting other people, it's a great role, great industry to move into. I more want to work out how does someone get to where you are, and I want to move a little bit back into your past and talk about what you did before you got to this role, especially when I started with the analyst position and how that all came about.
So to start off with, I'd encourage anyone who wants to get into any field, whether you're making a transition or moving into it for the first time out of education, you volunteer your time there first, which is largely how I got the analyst position. So back in the day, there was a website you could go to called Hitmaker, and it still exists, but it's grown substantially and it offers more paid roles now. But back in the day, you were able to go there for volunteer opportunities. There was contact information for club owners, for team owners. So I applied originally for a coaching position for a team based in Israel. I didn't get it, but I really enjoyed the leadership there. And so I sent them a follow-up email saying, hey, could I work for you as just an analyst? I'll watch your VODs. I'll come up with a system that provides you actionable data. And then I'll talk to your head coach and I'll do that all on my time. You'll owe me nothing. So that kind of led to a few other opportunities where I was working with other clubs. I worked with a club in England. I worked with a club in Texas, where I'm from. And then I took all that experience, the analyst experience, and I came to Western when they decided they wanted to have an eSport program. And I said, hey, so I've worked with all these clubs. I put in the time. I have a crazy amount of education, just ridiculous. I was at college for too long. And so they gave me the opportunity to come here and build this place and start this community. And I've really enjoyed the experience.
Oh, that's a very interesting story that you got there. I have one question around the analyst role. Like when you started being an analyst, were you a very good player before that? Or is that like analysis of the game is a space that always interested you and you would prefer analyzing games than actually playing the game?
I'd say these days, as I've grown a little bit, I'd prefer to move into an analyst role, a support role. Where I am now, I'm very happy. Growing up, I was super excited to play the games, but what we want out of life changes as we go on. So I like where I'm at now. Yeah.
And do you feel that your analyst experience have helped you, like, because you have so many games, right? So you have this ability, I would say, that to jump from one game to the other. Do you think that that role that you had as an analyst helped you, where if you were maybe a professional gamer, you would have to focus on one single game?
Absolutely. And I say this all the time. So the system I use to coach is based largely on a program management philosophy that can apply to a number of things, even outside of esports. You review a system, in this case, a game. So I'm gonna say basketball, even though basketball isn't an esport. In basketball, you start with the ball in the middle, and a successful end goal is putting the ball through the opposing team's hoop. That's the system. So then you look at the system and you break it down into data. So you pass the ball. Sometimes people block it and then they steal it and they shoot on your goal. So then that's data. So then you use that data to establish fundamentals, and then you improve those fundamentals. So if you're getting the ball stolen a lot while you're passing, then you would focus on ensuring those passes connect and are successful going forward 1 week. And that's what you would focus on based on the data. Now you can apply that to a number of things outside of esports as well. And that's why I think it's such a good skill to have. And yes, I think it also makes me a bit more flexible in esports. So let's say that I play a team where their coach is one of the top 100 Smash Brothers players in the world. He's won a bunch of titles. His team will more than likely beat my team. However, I have teams in Rocket League. I have teams in League of Legends. I have teams in other titles besides Smash Brothers. So yes, he beats me in Smash Brothers, but do I beat him across those other titles? And then do my students then enjoy the experience that way? So I've found some success in approaching our program like that. And I think it's been highly beneficial, my past leading up to this.
Interesting. So you're looking at your program not at a game level, but at like overall level.
Oh yeah,
which is very interesting. And so when you are working in, when you were getting into that career for esports, I'm very curious because we work with a lot of parents at Valo Esports, and I'm very curious what was your experience with your parents when telling them, "Hey, I'm going to go into esports. This is my dream or my vision." What was your parents' reaction?
So I left a career in healthcare for esports. I saw that esports has a greater potential to improve lives and make a difference. So they were surprised, to say the least. They've been supportive. It's been a fun ride so far. And so far I've been successful here. So I think everyone's happy with where I ended up.
Nice. I have like maybe that's a side question, but I have this experience with my dad when I had to explain him that I'm going to do Valo Esport. I had to spend quite a good amount of time explaining him because he's like new to computers. So I wonder like for you if you had similar experience where because healthcare is something everyone understands. Did you have to spend a big amount of time doing the explaining?
I had to explain what I do here and why I wanted to do it. I still do that from time to time. So yes.
Cool. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, me, I use I always use the soccer example because I mean he loves soccer, so I try to like join the soccer and esport explaining. Okay, soccer you have a coach. In video games you can have a coach too, and it is interesting to see the reaction from people outside the esports world. And so getting to that, do you have any like around the parents, when you deal with the students' parents, did you have any interaction with the parents where you had to do some explanation or And then if yes, how do you approach this situation?
So I do student tours. If I had my way, I'd do them every week. For our program to grow and survive, I have to recruit students. Students bring their parents to campus. Parents have a number of concerns when it comes to esports. So our esport athletes have access to an arena with very fancy technology. They're concerned they'll spend too much time here. I explain to them their teams practice once a week and that we're open beyond that, but we do other things like include a physical mandates or physical activity mandates. We monitor GPAs here. If a student's GPA drops below a certain point, I take them to meet with their counselor. And if their GPA doesn't improve, there's probation, there are other things we do. So parents at a collegiate level want to know that they're sending their students to college, not only to play in esports, but also to get an education and to grow and prepare themselves for the adult world. And we do that here. And so that's what I explain to them. And generally, parents are very happy to have their students join our program.
On that note, I wanted to ask a little bit about the process for recruitment. I know you and I and Luke have talked about this before off camera, but what is the things that you look for in players besides being good at esports? That obviously helps. What are some of the other things that someone needs to have to join, one of the strongest schools in this area?
So community fit is a big deal, not just at collegiate teams, but pro level as well. When I bring a student here to join our team, even if they're not the best mechanically, if the rest of the team has met them and liked them, then they'll continue to grow and be successful. Now, a student can meet teams ahead of time. Most collegiate esports teams have their own Discord that are open, or you can get an invitation to if you reach out to the director or the head coach. So you join a Discord, you meet the team you want to play with. You build chemistry with them. Now, it is also wise to work on your skills mechanically, but if a team likes you and if a team can be successful with you, then that's another way to approach joining a collegiate team.
Okay, interesting. And that process, something that always stood out to me was you talked about when you're recruiting, and we could possibly talk about scholarships here as well. If you offer scholarships, I know some other schools do, and what that process is. There was something that always stood out to me is that there's particular programs they have to still be interested in studying that has to align with you as well. Can you just take us through that again? I think I always found that quite interesting.
So in the fall of 2021, we should have 12 room and board scholarships, which will be a big boon to us. But in the past, what we've done is, as the coach who wanted to bring the student to campus for my team, I would reach out to the department where the student had an interest in getting their degree. So a student might want a film degree, they might want a chemistry degree, computer engineering is a big one. So then I go to the department, I say, okay, what kind of scholarships do you have available? What does the student have to do to apply? Then I facilitate that process. And that's part of my responsibilities here is helping my students to find as much financial aid as possible, even where I'm not able to supply it myself. And we've found success with that. That is something most schools will do for their students and their athletes, especially.
Yeah, no, that sounds like quite a difficult, it sounds like you've done a good job, but it sounds like quite a difficult process, right? You're kind of bartering and selling, to get kids and people the right opportunities, which is really cool. In terms of switching from high school to university, obviously having grades at a certain level is probably important. What do you look for in that area?
Well, 4.0 GPAs are the easiest to find scholarships for. So when I see that, it's very exciting, but it's certainly not a deal breaker for anyone who has a GPA lower than that. There's just a certain amount that the university needs for a student to get here. So we first look to make sure that the minimum is where we're at. And then we go from there. Higher is better, but in regards to what I want in my program, as long as my minimum is met, we can discuss the rest.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. What would you say to any parents out there right now who've got, children that are really interested in this process or this possible pathway? They're a little bit unsure about how to support or help. What would you say to those parents? What's the best way to help?
So we touched on this earlier. I think any high school student who's interested in joining a collegiate program should first join that collegiate program's Discord or social media, whatever that looks like. Sometimes it's Twitch, sometimes it's YouTube. But collegiate esport programs are not barred from meeting and discussing their program with high school students the way NCAA sports are. So a high school student can't go to a football team and say, hey, I'd like to practice with you for a little bit, see if there's good chemistry here. But you can do that in esports. So if you're a high school student interested in joining a collegiate team, get to know that team first. We're not restricted in meeting high school students. And then if you like the environment, if you like the school, then you could perhaps reach out to the coach to see some ways you could build up your skills mechanically. That's something you can do to continue to make yourself a strong prospect. And then I think after that, you're just looking at polishing up things on your application like your GPA, which you're probably already working on. So get to know the team, look into ways to build your skill mechanically, build up your GPA and other school-related credentials you're already working on.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. I really want to move into an interesting space because it's less about, I guess it's more about what the future holds for esports in this space. If someone's gone through a collegiate program, what can they kind of expect after they've graduated, in a sense? I think this is a really interesting aspect for esports right now, because you look at gridiron, basketball players. Not every player obviously is going to get drafted into the NBA or NFL, but that is a possible pathway. What is it for esports? Most kids are graduating. Is there potential for professional career afterwards? Does that kind of align with the collegiate space yet?
So similar to what I said about getting into collegiate teams will participate in a number of competitions that aren't necessarily school related. We did something called Fall Fest in Texas this year, and there were pro teams there as well. So get to know the other people in the space, find a team whose chemistry works well with you. I believe this is the best way to go from collegiate to pro. There are other pathways. One of my students this year started a pro team on the side that was an R6 team because this was their first year and they wanted a few more competitions. So they formed their own team and they went on to compete in like ESL and a few other places. And there were pro teams and club teams in that. So you look at the competitions you're going to, you'll find the spaces where those people meet and gather to discuss those competitions. And what I mean by that is, so we compete through something called Collegiate Star League. We compete through TESPA. Those are leagues that teams compete in, but they also have Discords for people to come together and discuss their game, discuss the competitions that are going on. So much like from high school to college, you should meet the team. From college to pro level, try to meet the team. There are other avenues. Perhaps you form your own team and then you go to competitions, but then you should be doing the same thing. So a lot like in the business world where you network, in the competitive space, network.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. What, where do you kind of see this space growing into? Do you think it will become more formal and I guess have that draft system being applied down the track, or do you see something else happening in the collegiate to professional connection? space?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I don't see any kind of draft necessarily. Although I say that, FIFA has had a draft recently. There are drafts that exist, but especially when you look at esports as a conglomerate of a bunch of different titles, do I see a giant, all-inclusive esport draft? I can't see that happening anytime soon. I just, between which companies own which rights, it's impossible administratively.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that. I was just thinking, I thought of something in my head. I'm like, oh, what if they had I started to think, what if it's different stuff? Like if it's a fighting game area, maybe they'd have draft systems for just fighting games or first-person shooters. But then I forgot that these giant companies own individual titles and would not want to share that.
Imagine Call of Duty and Overwatch draft side by side. Both of those companies, EA, I'm not sure they could agree on what that would look like.
I like the way you watched your words there. That was quite funny. Okay, in that sense, I want to ask you, if you were, talking to, I refer to it in another podcast as the esport gods. If you were a policymaker supporting the esport gods, what would you like to see over the next 10 years in this space? How does it improve? How does it create stability? Pretty much a better spectacle for the world of esport athletes to provide their entertainment.
I'm not sure this is what will happen. The closest thing we have to a regulating body is NACE, and even that is not recognized by, I'd even say, the majority of programs that are out there. And without a regulatory body, then when we get into a league, we could have teams that forfeit because they can't field enough players. I question whether they should have been allowed to register and compete in the league in the first place if they can even bring enough people together to compete on a regular weekly basis for a season. So I would, if I was an esports god, I would say, here's your regulatory body, and it decides what goes on in leagues. It decides things like drug testing, which is certainly not something every program recognizes, certainly not something every league recognizes, certainly not something every program does on a national level. I would regulate things about, you can meet with a high school student and do this. So right now it's great. If you're a high school student, you can meet a team, you can do whatever you want. There are pros and cons to that at an administrative level. And then when you compete, some teams don't even show up. And if you're going to be in a league and you're going to do all of the paperwork required, it's really disappointing. If you're going to bring social media people in, you say, hey, we're going to stream this upcoming competition, and then the other team just doesn't show up. My students who work for me, they're work study. They're getting paid no matter what. But if I have to pay them, I'm a little disappointed. I asked them to come in and get paid, and the other teams didn't show up. I would have some kind of regulatory authority, which we don't have, but I think we would benefit from. That's what I would do if I had unlimited cosmic power.
That's very interesting, actually, that you bring out this regulation. And actually, I just wanted to come back to like the fact that when you look at other sports, there is like a real pathway to go like in the different steps. Whereas for young students in esports, and that's something I experienced when I was in my small Counter-Strike career, where networking was really, really important. And even when talking to El General, the previous coach of Barca, he got his job through networking. And this is something like I'm really curious how this is brought through your program, in the sense where, like, even for adults, like I know some of my friends are taking networking classes, right? How to do networking properly and how to make good use of it. And I wonder if you, in your program, you incorporated that sense of like helping students in understanding the value of the networking and how to approach it properly, and what was your approach through doing this?
So we do things organically. We don't have, for instance, a networking seminar that I host every semester. But I mentioned earlier that I develop students into student leaders. One of the things that involves is having that student leader join the league they are competing in, social media, or their Discord, because there are things like the handbook of the rules of things we cannot do and we can do as part of that league. So I encourage them to join that Discord so they have a better understanding of what the competitions look like. Now, when they do that, there are other people on that Discord, other directors, there are perhaps recruiters from pro teams. So we encourage them to develop their networking skills without necessarily telling them, hey, today you're going to develop your networking skills.
Yeah, and I think that's like a good approach, right? Because you gradually get them into doing it instead of telling them this is what you need to do. They develop their own, because every person have different personality while networking. So I think it's good. Like I've seen a lot of young high school players talking to them, and they do not understand that because now most of the game is online, right? So they play online and they don't understand that they need to be in the community for having the like opportunities to keep growing. And I think, I mean, your experience of volunteering to be able to get into the community and then growing, I think that's a great example of like where networking is really impactful in your career in esports.
And there are other opportunities to volunteer and start that networking. I mentioned it as a way of getting into the career world of esports, but as a high school student, you could volunteer to work with TESPA, which is one of the major competition organizers in the southern US. You could just go to them and ask to volunteer at one of their programs. Then you become a part of the community. You develop your skills competitively because you're watching people compete at a high level, and you're developing contacts for the career world if that's something you even want to do later.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I want to start moving back to Colorado Western a little bit more. What's in store for you guys over the next few years? What's some big things happening?
Big things. We're looking to travel again. This year we didn't travel because of COVID. We just competed entirely online. We didn't meet in person, but one of the conditions of our keeping this space open and meeting in person was that we would not travel. So we're looking forward to traveling again at some point, hopefully. Everything clears up and we can do things like go to nationals for a league. I'd love to send players to South Korea. That's on the bucket list. I want to further develop our scholarship opportunities, which we're working on and which will come with a bigger roster. I want to expand our roster, and then I'd like to bring on more staff so that we can develop competitively much quicker, much better. So all of that's still coming. I'd say we've recently finished our facility, which is something we've been working on since we started a little over a year ago now, I think. Facility's done. Great. But we've still got a lot of fun things coming down the pipe and a lot of exciting things yet to come.
Yeah, awesome. My last official question, I always usually ask this for a player's perspective. I'm going to ask it in a different way today. For anyone out there who's at a college or a high school who wants to start their own club, and that probably means they're going to manage and be the manager of the esports club like yourself. What are 3 things you recommend starting up?
So there are differences to a professional level and a student level. However, there are things you can do which might help you get to that professional level a bit faster. So as a student, if you want to start an esports club, just do it. There'll be a student or res life department. They might even give you some money to start up. But the important thing is to put up flyers, find a meeting space or hold a meeting space online. You hold regular meetings and then you hold regular competitions. Then if you want to influence your university, you get your team into one of the national leagues that other collegiate teams compete in. You don't necessarily need to be a varsity team to do this, but you can take the results from that, and win or lose, you can influence the administration of your school to look at esports as something they might want to get behind. So let's say that you start a team, you put up a bunch of flyers on campus. You say, we're going to have an esports team now, meet in the library or online every Tuesday. Then you sign your team up for a national league. And then let's say you compete against a Western, or you compete against UTA or Full Sail down in Florida. Now, if you beat them, you promote that. You say, oh, look, our club beat a 6,000 student school. We're amazing. We should probably get funding for this. But let's say you lose. Then you promote that. You say, oh, we played our rivals in football or baseball and esports and we lost. I wish we had some funding for this. So come together, compete, and then promote what you're doing. And in my experience, things generally grow after that.
Perfect. Amazing. How do people get in contact with you, or how do people follow you and support your teams?
So we have a Twitch. It is WCUGG. And we have a YouTube. It is Mountaineers Esports. And all of this information can be found on the Western website, as well as my contact information. I'm more than happy to speak to any students. Feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, Kyle. This has been really, really insightful. This is the kind of information we can't research. So I really appreciate having you on and giving us so much information about what you do and in the space of an eSport manager.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you.